All righty, so glad everyone could be with us this evening. We are, of course, talking about don't kill your audience. And I think you know where that comes from. Okay, we've all heard of the death by PowerPoint. That's what we were talking about as we set this thing up. I want to start out with taking a look at a quick video from another speaker. Some of you may know Don McMillan. He's been talking about effective PowerPoint to corporations for a long time. One of his clips really gets at what we're talking about here. Now, because of intellectual property concerns, we're not going to include this clip in our recording. We will link to that recording, but we want to make sure that if you watch this in the replay that you are finding Don McMillan's original clip here. So I'm going to pause our recording. We've got people still coming in here, so glad that folks could be here. May have some more folks that will join us right in the middle of the recording. But let's go ahead and set this up so that we kind of have a feel for what we're talking about. Now, I've mentioned Don McMillan. He does a talk that's called Life After Death by PowerPoint. So let me pause the recording here. Okay, so most people will say they hate sitting through that kind of thing. And yet when we are on the other side of it, when it's our turn to speak and we use PowerPoint, then we have a tendency to do that same thing. And while he's doing it for comic effect, and by the way, as I said, I'm going to link to the original video in the description on the replay. He's got a lot of that material. We still got folks coming in. Glad folks are getting here. And Peg, right now, I'm not playing the video. Okay. I hope everybody was able to see it. Okay. Even though he was doing it for comedic effect, then there's a very real world expression there. And you see this slide? Isn't that stunning? This is from an actual tech conference. And Jane, I'm going to mute you just so that we're not interfering with each other. Glad you're here. Thank you. This is from a tech conference. This is a real slide, and it reminds me of what got me started with this years ago. I actually attended a conference at Austin Peay State University. Very good conference. Really enjoyed that particular conference. But there was one session that I saw the description, don't even remember the title of it, but it caught my attention. And I thought this is going to be a good session. And when I got in there, I'm pretty sure that it was being presented by some poor graduate student who was probably doing it for a class assignment. And I looked around the room. There were 12 of us in there. When he started his presentation, he literally, I counted them. He literally had 17 bullet points on each slide, and every word he said for the next hour was up there on those slides. As I looked around the room, every one of us was checking our cell phones. Nobody was listening because we knew that they were going to be sharing those slides later. There was no need to be listening to this. And I thought there's got to be a better way to do it. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of research out there to tell us how to effectively do this PowerPoint thing. So what I want to show you right now is a clip from another speaker. This is somebody some of you might have heard before. This is Seth Godin. A little different experience, isn't it? And in fact, this is supported by the research. So we're going to look at the research a bit. But before we do, I think we've had a few more people to join us. I'm going to ask you to write over there in chat. Where is it that you are coming from? Tell us what part of the world you're in. And what is it that brings you here? What's been your experience with PowerPoint? Maybe put one word that you think of when you think of PowerPoint slides. So let's see what we get in chat over here. Take our video off for just a bit there. Okay. Jim thinks speeches and boring. Okay, Sue Lynn. And Sue Lynn, I'm not sure if you're saying you come from church or you think church. My friend and colleague Becky, right here in Maryville, Tennessee. And Dar, you're right. When done right, very helpful. We'll be talking about that with the research here in just a second. Both and, yeah, Sue Lynn. Okay. One of my colleagues from Pellissippi State Community College, and yes, we use PowerPoint a lot. We've done some training with faculty there, as a matter of fact. One of my missions in life is ending bad PowerPoint. I think we've still got a ways to go, though, Ron. Okay, so we've got Toastmasters folks there. We've got Nashville. We've got all over the place. There's a positive input from Candace about clarity, and when it's used right, PowerPoint can increase your clarity. On the other hand, as we just saw from one of those slides, when used improperly, it can just make things fuzzy. In fact, there's research on that. I've mentioned that research a few times. Let me start talking about that a bit. There's this area of research that's called cognitive load theory. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to get real academic here. But it's worth knowing that there's research underneath this. Now, cognitive load theory basically says that we all have two channels through which we process information. We've all heard about kinesthetic learners and auditory and all that. That's not what we're talking about here. This is something that is universal. Dr. John Sweller, and we'll look at something Dr. Sweller said here in just a minute, but Dr. John Sweller is back in the 1950s was the first one that I know of to start working in this area. And he said that all of us have these two channels that we could loosely label as the verbal channel and the visual channel. That's not perfect, because what he was labeling the visual channel, we would also use that channel for processing instrumental music, for example. So it's sort of like right brain, left brain. That is, one bit of channel is better at dealing with detail. The other one is better with big picture. But just for ease of reference, we're going to talk about the verbal channel and the visual channel. Another bit of research from Dr. Sweller is that when either channel fills up, when it overloads, it doesn't just fill up and then stop, it dumps. I mean, one of the ways that we can illustrate this, if I were to share a phone number with you, 855-9605, can you say that number back to me? Just in the chat there, if you can say that number back, hearing it one time, type that number. Kelly, yes, right on top of it. Yes, yes, yes. Getting close there. Dar, that was real close. Okay. Pretty much no problem to give that one back. Okay. Now, let's try this one. 981-532-235-1597. Can you give me that number back in chat? And people who might be listening on the replay, no fair running it back. Okay. Candace, you came real close there. Okay. Ayaka, close. Most people are saying no way or not responding. This goes along with Dr. Sweller's insights. He found that the average person can maintain about 7 discrete items in short-term memory long enough to process them somehow. Now, people who've memorized the batting average of every player in the National League in baseball, they demonstrate you can master incredibly complex masses of information, but we do it chunks at a time. And when it fills up, it tends to just empty. You see, it's not mechanical. You didn't get just those first 7 digits and then stop. All that last number was 2 phone numbers put together to make a 14-digit number. I've been told that Dr. Sweller's research is the reason that phone numbers are structured the way they are. Now, if you want to get technical about it, phone numbers actually have 11 or 12 digits. You know, we've got the country code, which most of the time we don't have to dial. Okay, that's the +1. There's an area code, but we don't have to dial that area code most of the time. Most of us can manage a 7-digit number long enough to dial a phone. And it's based in that research of Dr. Sweller's. So little bit of history there, maybe. And we know that when we are inundated with information, that it can just get overwhelming. I used to experience this in school, and I know a lot of us did. I had 2 history teachers when I was in high school. Ours was a small school, so we only had 2 history teachers for the whole school. One of them was all about names and dates and wars and all this detail out loud. When I left his class, I was just kind of just stunned because none of it stuck. When we try to plow through our information and just, we've got a limited amount of time, we've got to get it out there just so we can say we covered it, waste of time, because none of it is likely to stick. On the other hand, I had Mr. Bruce. The fact that I still remember his name after all these years is indicative. He would tell stories in class. The stories gave us a framework to make sense of the detail that we then got from the reading. It was inspirational to some degree. It made me want to read the stuff. So the out loud had a different impact. It's worth keeping in mind that what we're doing when we speak and we're using PowerPoint, we're doing it out loud. And so we have to take this cognitive load thing, this memory thing into account. Now, I was mentioning Dr. Sweller. This is what he said at one point. And those of you who might be listening just on audio, it says the use of the PowerPoint presentation has been a disaster. It should be ditched. Early in PowerPoint, Dr. Sweller said we ought to just do away with PowerPoint. And in fact, there is some research to bear that out. Now, that's not what I'm arguing for. Let me first tell you what another academic has said about this, Dr. Richard Mayer. And you might notice I'm pausing to let you read what's on the screen. And those who might be just listening to the audio, it says people learn more deeply from words and graphics than from words alone. Now, Dr. Sweller calls what he does multimedia learning, but it's based in the cognitive load theory of Dr. John Sweller. The difference between those 2 academics is that Dr. Mayer realized that PowerPoint is just a medium. And like any medium, you have to take into account its characteristics as you structure your message. In some of his early research, Dr. Mayer showed that if you use PowerPoint the way we typically use it, that is with all those bullet points and a lot of text on screen and all that sort of thing, it really does interfere with understanding and retention. And the reason is because it overloads the verbal channel. You have words on the screen, you have words coming from the speaker. And just like when I gave you that 14-digit number, it overflowed and then emptied. It tends to have that effect when we've got words on the screen and words from our mouth at the same time. Makes sense when you stop and think about it that way. Now, Dr. Mayer's done a lot of research on it, and you may or may not know it's not a good idea to try to cite statistics from just one study, but looking at all of the studies, the patterns that he found, we can safely say that his research indicates when you use PowerPoint the way most people use it, it actually reduces understanding and retention by 15 to 20%. And I don't know for sure. I know Sue Lynn is on here from our work together in pastoring churches. You know, Sue Lynn, we've got this habit of putting scripture up on a screen up front at the same time that we're reading it. Now, we've gotten used to it. But there's some research that would say that may not be a good idea, that it can actually interfere with understanding and retention. I think when you add to it the fact that I may be reading out loud from a translation and somebody sitting out there in the pews is reading a different translation at the same time, we may have a challenge there. Okay, but Dr. Mayer also found that if you have graphics on the screen and words from the speaker's mouth, that you can increase understanding and retention by up to 20%. And I see the comment from Sue Lynn, we don't do it anymore. I get that may be one of the reasons why. Okay. But with supportive graphics, I know somebody that we both know, Sue Lynn, Ann Robbins, makes real effective use of graphics on the screen while she is preaching. It helps understanding and retention. Now, let me tell you just a little bit about one of his studies. Not going to get, as I said, not going to get real academic here, but it's worth seeing this pattern. In one of his studies, Dr. Mayer divided audiences up into 4 groups, and he used a trained actor to deliver a speech. The reason he used the trained actor was to try to make sure that each iteration of the speech was as similar to every other iteration as possible. The first group was what, let me be sure I'm getting this accurate. The first group was just the speaker, no PowerPoint at all. The second group, they showed the script to the group on screen, no speaker. It was kind of boring, but basically they sat there and read what would be said. The third group got what we might call a traditional PowerPoint. That is a speaker with bullet points on the screen. Finally, the fourth group had what we've been talking about the last few minutes, which was a speaker delivering the words, and then what was on the screen were pictures and graphics that supported what was being said. The first 2 groups, when they tested for understanding and retention, had about the same level. That second group was kind of bored, like I said, but when they gave a test to see how much did they understand, and then they came back 2 weeks later to test their memory, see how much of it stuck, those 2 groups came out about the same. The third group with the traditional PowerPoint, 15% less understanding and retention. But that fourth group had a 20% increase over the first and second group in understanding and retention. So it makes sense to try to figure this stuff out and how to make it effective. You might notice one of the things I'm doing here in Zoom, and by the way, what we're talking about is mainly design. We're not talking so much about the tech of how you do this. When you add Zoom into it, you're just adding another layer. You might notice that I'm trying to make sure that I don't just switch to a PowerPoint slide and then stay there. I don't put the PowerPoint slide up and then maybe I'm off over there to the side. Maybe I'm not even on the screen at all. PowerPoint is an aid. It's not the speech. But with just a little bit of tech, you can make it to where you put yourself still down there on the screen, down in the corner, and then the slide up there over your shoulder. That works a little bit better for understanding and retention. The big thing, though, is the slide design itself. Okay, so let's take a look again. We just quoted from, here we are with the Starship. We just quoted from Dr. Mayer. When we saw Seth Godin do his speech, now that was just a little segment of a longer speech. But if you look at most TED Talks, they either don't use PowerPoint at all, or as they're using it, it is this kind of image-based PowerPoint that supports what's being said. I'll tell you in just a minute, Seth's rules of thumb for PowerPoint. But if we had seen that whole talk, he talked about a man named Nathan Winograd, who was a leader in the no-kill shelter movement. He is the one who basically forced the ASPCA to stop euthanizing animals for the most part and to build no-kill shelters. Had Seth done a traditional PowerPoint, there would have been bullet points that had information about Nathan, and there would have been some information about the ASPCA. What he did was to instead have this picture, this one right here on the screen, as he told the story. It helped people to remember about the story. Later in that same talk, as he was, and I guess actually this was in the clip we saw, if he'd been doing a traditional PowerPoint talking about the different ways that we influence people, it would have been something like this. And even now, I'm just trying to illustrate a point. Yet it's hard for you to resist the temptation to sit there and read that. And while you're reading it, you're losing a little bit of what I'm saying. Instead of doing that, then he talked about factories, and he had a graphic that would help people to remember that. And then he talked about TV. And then he talked about leadership. And of course, his slide, when he did this, actually had animation to it. So that helped to draw people in. This is just far more effective at helping people to remember. Now, one of the things to keep in mind for any speech is, why do we even use slideware? That's the first thing to ask. Some of you may know that the #1 TED Talk involves Sir Ken, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson. He has over 60 million views of this particular video. One of the few TED speakers to have more than one video, more than one talk on the main TED stage. He never uses PowerPoint. And I guess I should say he never used PowerPoint. Unfortunately, Sir Ken passed away a few years ago. But in his talks, he didn't use PowerPoint. He used story to create mental images. He was using words to address both the visual and the verbal channel. You don't necessarily even need to use PowerPoint, and yet we tend to have this assumption that it should be there. So here's the difference in the processing, the two sides of the brain. If we are trying to process a picture, we don't start in the upper left-hand corner and then scan across and then go to the next line and go to the next line. This is great for almost literally big picture processing, for figuring out music, for appreciating art, for grasping concepts like emotions. This is the kind of thinking we're talking about. If we're going to process type, I'm going to warn you, there's going to be text on this next slide. Don't get sucked into trying to read it. We're just giving you an example of the type of processing. If we try to read that, we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner. We're going to take it phrase by phrase, line by line. It's slow, but it's precise. Just a different kind of processing. One of my contentions for my clients and for my students is that speaking isn't about getting the words right. It's about giving the words impact. But if we get sucked into thinking that what we're doing with speaking is primarily sharing information, and this is just a way of saving, making photocopies, then we can really do a disservice to our audience. Okay, so I am looking over here at the chat to see, let's see, there are some questions that have come in. Jeff, these same stats would apply in some way when the speaker isn't visible. When you're hearing their voice with some bullet points, well, I can tell you about some research that Dr. Mayer did where instead of having a speaker out loud and then pictures on the screen, what they had was, let me be sure I get this right. They had words on a screen and they were playing instrumental music at the same time. They found a similar boost in understanding and retention. Now, if they were playing music that had lyrics, you still had the same challenge as far as overloading channels. But instrumental music and then words on a screen. So the music was being processed by the visual channel. And the words, even though they were reading it off a screen, that was in the verbal channel. So I think that would likely apply. Kelly, you're asking about the software that I'm using for the presentation. I'm using what's called It's spelled MMHMM. I call it the app with no vowels. Now, there's other things you can do. OBS is similar. OBS actually is much more powerful and gives you more options, but it also has a much higher geek factor. And I use that as a term of honor. But for a lot of people, figuring out OBS is just overwhelming. And because it's open source software, there's not a manual that comes with it. There's a community out there, though, that will help you to figure it out. If you are on a Mac, Ecamm will do this, and Ecamm is very easy to use. I almost bought a Mac just because of that. Used to have a Mac. When I need to replace the computer, it costs more than what I was willing to spend, so I don't have the Ecamm, don't have a Mac. But I find to be kind of useful. Works a little bit better for me than the built-in Zoom. Now, I have to be honest, I'm not going to turn this into a session on I have to be honest, though, and say that ability to handle virtual backgrounds, it's got less forgiveness. What's the word I'm looking for here? You've got to have your colors just right. If I had a different color shirt on, this background may or may not flicker, you see. Zoom is pretty good about figuring out virtual backgrounds. So it just kind of depends on your needs there. Okay, so let's take a look at the guidelines that have come to us from Dr. Mayer's research. Okay, first of all, Seth Godin, I mentioned him a little while ago. Now, this is not research-based, but this is Seth's rules of thumb, his rule that he follows himself. No more than 6 words to a slide ever, period. And just in case you're having a little trouble reading those small words down there at the bottom, okay, this slide does not follow that rule. It still works according to Mayer's research, and we'll talk in just a moment about why that is. But Seth's rules of thumb, pretty good. You're not going to get into trouble following those rules. In fact, you might have noticed from his clip that there was one time when he had a sentence he wanted to put up there. It actually fit within the 6 words. He only had 5 words. But in order to achieve the effect he was going for, he put 3 words on one slide and then 2 words on the next slide. I think the reason this works within cognitive load theory is because when you only have 5 or 6 words on a slide, you don't read them, you grasp them. So it's actually making use of the visual channel rather than the verbal channel. Okay, so as I said, not going to get in trouble following that, but there actually is more leeway. That's the word I was looking for a little while ago. There's more leeway within what the research tells us. So here's what Dr. Mayer has determined from his multiple studies, that you can stay within these rules and be more effective, still get that 20% boost. One of the things he says is use images, but not cheesy ones. And what I mean by cheesy ones, if you've got those built-in graphics that come with PowerPoint, and you're just scattering them in there as decoration. Maybe you're going out there on the internet and you're just grabbing, what do they call it, clip art. This actually has been shown by Dr. Mayer's research to interfere because it's extraneous. It doesn't do anything to help nail down the concept you're talking about. The kind of images that Seth Godin was using, different images. The images that I've been using, they're not just the cheesy clip art. So that means you got to do a little bit of work to go out there and find the graphics that you need. Now, you're going to get a resource that I will share with you at the end of this, a link that will take you to a white paper that you can download that points you to several places where you can get graphics for free, but perhaps more importantly, graphics that are licensed so that you don't violate anybody's intellectual property by using it. So that'll be coming along at the end of this session. So leave out the extraneous material and make sure that you are using intellectual property that you are allowed to use. This is a design consideration here. That is to keep it simple. You'll notice that this screen, and let's get it a little bigger here behind me, get myself sorted out of the way. This is a screen capture from another TED Talk, When Ideas Have Sex. Simple design. There is a consistency from one slide to the next. Every slide simply has that label at the top and that blue border at the bottom. And if you look closer at that blue border, you will see that it's a light bulb that looks sort of like a sperm cell. So it subtly supports the idea that he's talking about when ideas have sex. So that's another guideline about keeping it simple. The research from Dr. Mayer says no fancy transitions or animations. Now, Kelly, I was telling you and everybody about one of the things that I don't like about as much is that it has no transitions at all. When I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation, I actually use one of the transitions, but only one. Now, I'll take that back. There is an exception, but it's beyond what we're talking about here tonight. The one that I use probably 95% of the time is simply fade. All of those extra fancy transitions, the ones where you're spinning in, on the blinds and spirals and all that sort of thing, Dr. Mayer has found that is simply distracting. He suggests that rather than try to cram too much on a slide, that we choose to have more slides and fewer bullets. We were talking about transitions and animations a moment ago. Some of you who really know how to use PowerPoint, you know how to set up animations within a slide. But for the most part, you don't even have to worry about that because you can create an animation type effect simply by using more slides. For instance, if you must have bullets, Dr. Mayer's research shows that you should use animation in order to control the attention flow. Now, you can accomplish this with actual animation in PowerPoint. But what I just showed you was simply 3 slides. All I did was create the slide that you see in front of you right now. And then I deleted the last line and then deleted the next line and deleted the next line. And then I set them up to follow each other so that it winds up with this. That way you don't have to even figure out how to make animation work. It's just a matter of starting with your target and then removing elements to get back to the beginning. Another guideline from Dr. Mayer: no more than 2 lines of text to a bullet. This is if you have to use bullets for some reason. No more than 2 lines of text to a bullet. No more than 4 bullets to a slide. And you need to make sure that your font size is at least 28 point. Now, Zoom kind of changes this. And then having the ability to do things like this, changes that sort of thing. So we're talking about just a basic PowerPoint slide. Does anybody know what the default is for the font size in PowerPoint? Okay. Seeing if anybody would throw that into chat, not seeing a response. So spoiler alert, the default font size is 18 point. I think this is a good place for me to kind of take a little bit of a side trip and tell you that the history of PowerPoint is it was not designed to be presentation software. That surprises a lot of people. That was not its intended purpose. It was actually invented by Apple. Now, you're aware that PowerPoint is a Microsoft product, okay? Apple thought so little of it that they sold it to Microsoft. They created it as a way for the engineering department. And I know if Jim North is on here, Jim, I think you said you had a background in engineering there. I see you up there. It was created as a way for the engineering department to communicate with the marketing department. Its original intention was to serve as an outline tool. And that's the reason to this day that it defaults to bullet points. People started using it off-label, as the doctors would say. The first use of PowerPoint was to create actual transparency slides. As I look around my screen, I think there are folks here who remember those transparency projectors, those overhead projectors. And the first use I made of it was taking documents and photocopying them onto slides. I mean, talk about horrible design. But that's the way people used it. And so when Apple saw how Microsoft was bundling it and using it for presentation software, that's when they went back and made what I honestly consider a superior product, Keynote. Keynote just works better than PowerPoint. But Microsoft has the market, and so we want to learn to use it effectively. I'm also going to pause at this point and kind of turn to some of the questions that I see in chat. Sue Lynn, I see about the hymn lyrics projected for worship. I think hymn lyrics are a little different because we've got the rhythm. Okay, they're kind of familiar to people anyway. Most of the time, what they need is a reminder. I don't think we run into the distraction factor that we might with having scripture up there as we're trying to read it. And we've also got really the visual part of it with the music. So just a little different kind of thing. I think it does help a lot of people to be able to look up instead of having their heads buried in a hymnal. Kelly, let me see here. If you're using PowerPoint, and Kelly, you may or may not know it, you're kind of hitting a little bit of a hot button with me here. You're using PowerPoint to communicate details for an audience, like a staff meeting. People will read an accompanying handout. And in fact, Dr. Mayer's advice and my own advice here, I see this happen in classrooms all the time, especially. If I give a handout in class, gave one out this morning, okay, and as some of you don't know, I teach at Pellissippi State Community College. So I've been working with college students for 40 years now. If I give them a handout, the reality is they can read that thing anytime in the next 20 years. They only have me for the next half hour. But human nature being what it is, what are they going to do? They're going to sit there and read that thing instead of listen to me. So my advice is don't give a handout to an audience while you're talking, or give it to them at the end. Give it to them at the beginning if you need to, but be sure that you say to them, now, folks, you're going to have this handout. Don't miss what we're saying here. The handout is to give you a reminder later. I use an adapted handout sometimes. And Kelly, I'm sure this is something that you've done. You give them a handout that has writing in it, but it's got fill in the blanks. And so you're making sure they've got the structure you want them to have. The act of writing it down helps them to get the details set, but they're not just sitting there reading the thing. So I hope that makes sense. And I agree about Unsplash. That's one of the resources we'll be talking about in that white paper that I'm going to share. Okay, I think we've got a couple of others. Valda, yes, 18 is so small. Indeed, indeed. And yes, the email after is a real good way to do that. So there's always concern about making sure what you have said is still accessible to them. You guys may or may not remember Dr. John Sweller's name, for example. You know, if you want to look up more about what he said, then you would have the replay available to where you'd be able to go and get that. And there's other ways that we can share that. So yes, supporting both the out loud and the detail is a very important practical aspect of this. Okay, so let's dig back in here. By the way, one of the reasons that I'm turning these slides on and off is for variety, because it's kind of boring to sit and watch a talking head the whole time, right? But if we've just got a slide up there, that gets kind of boring itself. So here's some more design insights from the academic research. Ironically enough, Kelly, this kind of gets at what we were just talking about. There is another speaker named Gar Reynolds. Some of you may have heard of Gar. He primarily works in Japan, and he has written a couple of books on effective PowerPoint. He has this thing he calls the slidegement. Okay, the slidegement is like this Frankenstein thing. It's trying to do the work of both a document and a slide deck at the same time. The problem is that it doesn't have enough detail to be an effective document, but it has too much detail to be an effective slide. So Gar's advice is images for your slides and give them a real handout or point them to a web page. Don't just print your slides and hand to them. Now, there's ways to adapt that. Kelly, in the training setting, and I'm sure others in here, Gar, we've been in settings like this. You can have a lot of information on that slide, but usually the information is revealed one bit at a time. So it's like they're building the slide in front of you. That allows you to not get lost in the detail. And that can be an effective way of creating a slide that is sort of a document at the same time. But generally speaking, you want to take it a little bit slower. Let me see. Mike has made a comment here, creating a second presentation. Put what you want them to remember in the notes section. That can be real effective. Okay. But I still think most of the time you are better off giving them an actual handout, maybe with thumbnails of the slides. And Mike, I think that's kind of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, the problem with the thumbnails is they either can't see it or a year later they don't know what that little graphic was. And when you do it as just one slide with exactly what you wanted them to take away on the bottom, they'll, it's all there.
Exactly.
But it's cumbersome.
It can be. And so what I try to do is an adaptation of that sort of thing. I might have the thumbnail just to help people remember what that slide was when they were in the live presentation, but it's not going to be something that is really important for them to be able to see. If there's something important, then I'm going to do it like, you remember, well, magazines. Magazines will have text, and then they'll have a little picture down there and it'll say figure 1 or something like that. So to take the slide and treat it as an illustration within an article, it's not going to be every slide, though, only the ones that they actually need to see. I think that's probably applying that same principle. So yeah, good point. Good thoughts. Thank you. Okay, so let's wind this up here. As we said a little bit earlier, remember that out loud is not about getting the words right. It's about giving the words impact. That will help us decide what we want to put in our PowerPoint presentations. Now, you guys have been making comments and asking questions all along, but we want to give a particular time here. If you have some questions, this is a good time to ask those questions. You might want to put them into chat. You might want to just open up your microphone. If we run into situations where people are talking over each other, we'll go to raising hands. But this is a good opportunity for you to ask whatever questions that you might have about what we've talked about or anything related to it. Ya da 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 da. I keep meaning to make some filler music while we're waiting for people. Okay, so let's make use of something that I've learned to use in class. And maybe this is a technique you'd be able to use in your own speaking, by the way. We know to use the chat box. We've been using the chat box some here. This is a technique that I call a delayed chat. I'm going to ask you to give a response in chat, but don't hit the enter key yet. And what this does is it makes sure that everybody is giving an original response. Now, it's not originality that we're talking about here. It's making sure that your thought process is not prejudiced by what you see somebody else saying or asking. So I'm going to ask you to go to chat, and I'm going to ask you to write a sentence about what is the fuzziest point from what we've talked about this evening. What are you most unclear about? Okay, but don't hit the enter key yet. Just type a response in there, and we'll give you a few seconds to type, a little bit of time to think. As I was telling a group earlier today, there's a surprising number of very effective speakers who are introverts. And introversion doesn't mean that we are shy. I'm a social introvert. Okay, introversion basically means where do you get your energy from, which doesn't affect the speaking thing all that much. But it also is how do you form your thoughts? Extroverts want to form their thoughts by speaking. introverts want to form their thoughts before they speak. And so the delayed chat gives an opportunity for people to form their thoughts and then put something in there. So I filled enough time there. If you've got a response, go ahead and hit the enter key. And then I'm going to give time for that to come in here a little bit, and then we'll see what questions that we might need to ask. And by the way, do you notice one of the things that happens here with delayed chat? At first, when I said, what questions do you have? Really didn't get much of a response. By giving you the delayed chat means, then we've surfaced some issues. So let me take a look over here and see what some of these are. I'm going to scroll back through. Okay. Most unclear about how to keep the contents of slide to 6 words. And that what it takes, Sue Lynn, is for the most part, most slides are not going to have any words. The words are coming from here. But then if you're going to put words on the slides, then more slides. We're not going to take the time to go back through, but if you go back and look at the Seth Godin video, and especially if you watch the full video, I'll be linking, that TED Talk was 17 minutes long. You will see that there are places where he uses words, but he just breaks them up. 3 words on this slide, 2 words on the next one. There are other examples I could point to that seem to be violations of that. There is a talk by William Kamkwamba, for example, where he's talking about building a windmill in order to deal with a drought. There's a slide that he shares that shows news reports about how the drought, the famine is affecting his country. And you look at that and you say, well, there's a lot of words on that screen. You're not supposed to read the words, though. What he's doing is showing graphics of a newspaper clip here, one here. And the total effect of the slide is, boy, there was a lot of coverage of that. It's about the impression. It's about the impact. So there are some related stuff there, but just as a rule of thumb, and by the way, it's a rule of thumb, it's not a law. So just kind of keep the principle in mind, and I think that will guide you here. Okay, and Jim, I'm going to type it in here so we can be sure we've got the spelling of the H is in the middle. And if you go to .app, then you can learn about it. Okay, and just for clarity, I'm not an affiliate or anything. Okay, I just think it's a useful tool. Okay, here, impactful statements. Okay, and Kathy, I think one of the things that goes on there is that the pictures or the graphics help to enhance your words. But the impactful statement then comes from the word. The way that you phrase it, and we know this as speakers, we could talk about effective speaking as involving 3 components. There's effective content, effective organization for the ear, and effective delivery. Just like when you study biology, you may be able, for purposes of study, to separate the respiratory system from the circulatory system. You can't really separate effective delivery, organization, and content. In reality, they all go together. And so this delivery thing about an impactful statement, I think that has more to do with delivery and how that makes the content accessible. Now, that may or may not get at what you're going for there, Kathy. You know how to get in touch with me, and I'm going to be sharing my contact information here. Let's talk more if we need to. And I said I was going to be sharing the contact information. I guess it's up there, isn't it? Okay, so you guys have a way of getting in contact with me. The technical info, Darlene, it was just beyond what we're trying to do right here. One of the things that I will do is to make available to get in contact with me. We can talk about other ways that we might be able to work together. I'm happy to help people figure out the tech stuff, but doing that through a group gathering here could be Not overwhelming exactly. There'd be some people who'd be overwhelmed. There'd be some people who'd be bored because they know it already. So I'm willing to help people with the technical part of it, just outside of this venue. Handouts, Renee, you say you like to use them to take notes. And some of that is just different ways that different people process. I'll be honest, I do fine with handouts. Okay, I'm not tempted to sit there and read instead of listen. Sometimes you give a handout and you tell people, okay, we're going to be going through this, so stick with me. And then you tell people, now look on page 4. You do a little extra effort in order to control attention, then a handout can work. It's just that what I see happening so often is people will give a handout and then they really don't talk about it a whole lot. And then people sit there and read the handout instead of listening. So that's what you have to be careful about. Elizabeth, how to translate for an audience that expects PowerPoints as a way to take notes. Yeah, you do run into that sometimes. And yeah, it's extra work creating the handout and the slides. Best advice that I think I have for you there is to tell an audience up front. You know, we've got slides to help you to get these concepts, but how many sets of notes like that do you have sitting on your desk that you've never looked at again? You know, what we're doing is we're giving you a handout. And by the way, the handouts that I use are fairly simple. Most of them are 2 to 4 pages. I tend to use that fill in the blank thing. And that does more to help people remember the stuff. So if you're dealing with the kind of conference, I've gone to academic conferences where they ask me 3 weeks ahead of time to send them my slide deck. And I resist that because I know that's not going to be very effective. I know there will be people who will say, I'll just skip the presentation, just send me the slides. And they're not going to get it from the slides. But on those occasions when they've basically forced me to do so, I'll tell you quite honestly, what I do is I make a slide deck to send to them to satisfy them, and then I make a good slide deck. So there's a handout, but it's different from what's up there on the screen. The good resource, Jamie, I'm assuming maybe you're talking about a good resource for getting those images. Is that what we're talking about there?
Maybe the images, appropriate images.
Okay. Let me go ahead and share here. You know, I thought I hit the enter key here a minute ago, and it looks like that it's still sitting there. So here's how is spelled. Let me go ahead and share some contact information here because we're going to, let me think about this for a second. Hold on a second. I have I've got to pull it up over here. Did have it in. Not seeing what I was expecting to. Eventbrite, save audiences. That's not it. There it is. Okay. So this is how you can get that list of resources. Did it go? No. Here we are with our starship again. There we are. Okay, so that will take you to, we mentioned Unsplash a little while ago. That's on that list. Pixabay. There's several other sources there for effective images that are legal to use. Again, that's a whole other seminar, and we are a little bit over time at this point, folks. I was going to try to keep this to an hour. So we could spend another hour on the intellectual property thing. You know, I can tell you that in the commercial areas that most of us are going to be working, in my academic classroom, if I use a Dilbert cartoon one time in a class, it's not affecting his distribution. I'm not making any money off of it. It fits within the 4-part test for use of intellectual property. I will guarantee you, if I were using it in a professional setting where I was paid for it, I don't know how he finds out, but somehow he would find out, and I would get a cease and desist order from his lawyer. So you do have to pay attention to this sort of thing. Okay. And then Candace, examples of my work. In a way, what we've been looking at here is examples of my work. This is a slideshow that I have adapted from when I used it. Used it for academic conferences. I've used it for commercial training, business training. I'm trying to follow the principles myself. That's why we have that plain yellow type on black background. Keep it simple. That's why on this slide, my virtual background, I've just got a fairly simple background here. Okay, but there's other examples. Okay, now let's see here. Other questions? Mike has a comment. SlideShare has good examples. They're not perfect, but a good source for ideas. And I would agree with that. In fact, one of your best resources is looking at TED Talks. Just go to TED.com. Those speakers work with people who are schooled in these principles. I honestly don't know. We've got some folks on here right now who work with TEDx and all that sort of thing. I honestly don't know if they would ever use the term cognitive load theory. But the way that they teach people to do TEDx's is right there in line with what's expected with cognitive load theory. So just looking at a TEDx presentation is going to give you some good guidance. Mary, I'm coming back to yours about colors on slides. Can you tell me a little bit more what you're thinking about with that idea of colors on slides? Not sure if you can get your mic unmuted there. And several of you are saying you have to run. I understand that. Glad you could be with us tonight. We will email out about the replay for anybody who wants something additional. And here is how to get in. Oh, that was what I was looking for before. Here's how to get in touch with me. Okay. DonaldKing.com. So stay in touch. Be sure and grab that resource if you would like that, tinyurl.com/graphicssources2. It's also in the chat. And hope that will help you to get your stuff together. Mary says she cannot get her microphone. So I don't know if you want to, Mary, to try to type something in here. Valda, I appreciate the feedback. Not sure if you're still here with us. And I'm going to give Mary, okay, she says she'll talk later. Okay, so anybody who would like to get in contact, maybe talk about technical stuff, Dar, drop me an email. Be glad to help wherever I can. But we will, for tonight, say thanks, everyone. I hope this was useful time for you. Appreciate your participation, and let me know what else you might like to know about this kind of thing. You can drop me an email at don@donaldking.com. It'd be good to know what kind of follow-ups you would like to see. This comes to you courtesy of the Morning Cup Toastmasters Club. And so wherever you are in the world, there is a Toastmasters Club that's going to be close by that'll meet your schedule. If you're in the Knoxville area, we encourage you to visit with the Morning Cup. We meet at 7:30 a.m. Yeah, but it's worth it. Best coffee in East Tennessee. Be glad for you to visit with us. And Toastmasters is, as Lois Kramer calls it, the off-Broadway of speaking. It's the best place for you to develop your speaking abilities. So you can go to Toastmasters.org, click on Find a Club, and put in your zip code. You'll be able to find a club close by. Go check them out. In the meantime, drop me a line. We will wrap things up tonight, and I look forward to talking with you guys more later. Have a good one.